The cold settled over Greenwich Backcountry the way a heavy curtain falls at the end of a play. Slow, absolute, and merciless. It was the kind of winter night when frost clung to the stone walls of the large estates, when breath hung like smoke in the air, and when even the deer stayed hidden deep in the trees. The Hayes residence, tucked behind a wrought iron gate and a long snow-covered drive, stood in silent contrast to the storm creeping across Connecticut. Victoria Hayes stepped into the foyer only to feel the sharp blast of winter rush past her ankles. Before she could register what was happening, the front door slammed behind her with a force that rattled the glass panes. She spun around, gripping her thin robe tight around herself. Her feet were bare, pressed against stone steps so cold she felt the sting shoot straight to her bones. "Andrew!" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden shock of the temperature. "Andrew, open the door. Please." The only response was the metallic echo of the deadbolt sliding into place. She stared at the door in disbelief. Her husband's silhouette lingered behind the beveled glass for a moment, broad shoulders, one hand on the handle, before he stepped away into the warm glow of the house. The lights inside dimmed as he moved further back, leaving her alone on the front steps with nothing but the wind and the sound of her own shivering breath. The gated neighborhood was as silent as a mausoleum. Massive hedges shielded each property from the next, and the nearest home was far enough away that her voice wouldn't reach it, even if someone heard. No one in this part of Greenwich would open their door at this hour. Privacy here was sacred, intrusion unthinkable. Victoria pounded her fist against the glass. The impact sent a dull vibration through her numb knuckles. "Andrew, it's freezing. Let me in. Please." Still nothing. Not a movement. Not a shadow. Not even the sound of footsteps. Humiliation hit her first, a sharp, cutting sensation she felt just beneath her ribs. Then panic followed, curling up her spine as the cold began to seep into her skin. The robe she wore had been enough for their heated house, but out here, beneath the weight of the winter air, it felt like paper. Her teeth began to chatter, her fingers stiffening as she pressed them against the window again. "Andrew," it came out barely above a whisper, the kind of plea that carried every crack in her breaking composure. She turned, scanning the porch, the steps, the walkway buried beneath a thin sheen of ice. She needed something. Anything. She couldn't stay out here much longer. Her gaze caught on a shape near the edge of the frozen flower beds, a garden gnome. One she'd bought during the summer when she still believed small touches could make this place feel like home. Now the figure was half buried in ice, its painted smile hidden beneath a crust of frost. Victoria stumbled toward it, each step a battle against the biting cold. She crouched, sinking her hands into the snow. Her fingers went numb almost instantly, but she kept digging until her palms closed around the statue. It was heavier than she remembered, solid ceramic, completely frozen to the ground. With a desperate grit, she pried it loose. The sound of ice cracking beneath it echoed faintly in the night. She dragged in a breath that burned her lungs, then stood, the gnome clutched against her chest. Her arms trembled, not from its weight, but from the realization of what she was about to do. She stepped back toward the window. Frost dust coated the glass. She could see nothing inside. No sign of the man she had built her life with. She raised the gnome, teeth clenched against the cold, ready to strike. If she shattered the window, the alarm would go off. Andrew would be furious. She didn't care. Survival mattered more than consequences. She lifted the statue higher. Then a sound, a soft, distinct click, a door unlocking. But not their door. Somewhere nearby, in the stillness of the estate-lined street, another door swung open, and Victoria froze, the gnome suspended in midair, as the night took a sudden, breathless turn. The next morning, Greenwich was washed in a pale winter light, the kind that made everything appear sharper, colder. Victoria Hayes walked through the glass entrance of Caldwell Industries with the steadiness of someone who had spent the night fighting to keep herself composed. Her exhaustion pressed against her like a second skin, and humiliation still sat heavily in her chest, but she held her posture straight, her chin lifted. No one in this building needed to see the truth of what happened behind the walls of her home. The lobby hummed with the usual morning rhythm. Brief greetings, the rustle of winter coats being shrugged off, the muted thud of elevator doors. Yet something about the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a slight tightening at the edges, like a pressure drop before a storm. Victoria made her way to the executive floor. She wasn't expecting warmth or sympathy, but the stiffness that greeted her felt new. People looked busy, too busy. Conversations cut off a second too abruptly when someone passed. Phones were lifted to ears, even when they weren't ringing. Something had shifted. She found Ethan Caldwell, the CEO, near his office, leaning over a table cluttered with documents. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. His expression was pale, tight around the eyes, as if he had spent the entire night pacing instead of sleeping. "Morning," he mumbled, though his voice cracked slightly at the end. "Morning," Victoria replied, keeping her tone steady. She didn't press him, didn't ask questions. Ethan was not the kind of man who handled pressure well. His discomfort usually seeped through his demeanor like steam through a cracked pipe. But today, it wasn't discomfort, it was fear. Real fear. He shuffled the papers on the table with hands that trembled just enough for her to notice. His gaze darted toward the hallway as though he expected someone to appear at any moment, someone he hoped wouldn't. Victoria watched him quietly. A failed project could rattle a leader. Yes, and the recent tender loss had certainly hit Caldwell Industries hard. But this was different. The kind of dread Ethan carried in his shoulders was far deeper, as though something personal, something compromising, was wrapped tightly around his throat. When he finally retreated into his office, he closed the door a little too quickly. Victoria continued down the corridor, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She took note of the details she would usually overlook: hushed conversations behind half-open doors, staff members avoiding eye contact, department leads speaking in clipped sentences. The HR director passed her in a hurry, clutching a folder marked confidential. None of it screamed crisis, but together it whispered one. She returned to her desk, sitting slowly as she organized her notes for the day. The screen of her monitor reflected her face, composed, unreadable, but markedly different from the woman she had been even 12 hours earlier. She breathed in. Then she watched. From her vantage point, she tracked how people moved through the room, how they lingered near Ethan's door, how the accounting director and operations lead exchanged looks that lasted a beat too long. With each passing minute, the tension wove itself tighter into the seams of the office. Victoria knew corporate pressure well. She knew chaos. She knew crisis. But this was something quieter, more deliberate. Someone was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had already begun sinking its roots deep into the company. She didn't chase the thought yet. She simply let it settle, like a small stone dropped into a pond. This was the first hint, subtle, but undeniable, that something was very wrong inside Caldwell Industries. And though she didn't know it yet, the thread she noticed this morning would soon lead her into the heart of a secret no one intended for her to uncover. By the time evening settled over Greenwich, the office at Caldwell Industries had emptied into silence. One by one, lights dimmed across the executive floor. Coats were lifted from chairs. Goodbyes exchanged in tired whispers, and elevator doors closed with soft metallic thuds. Eventually, only the hum of the heating system and the distant echo of the cleaning crew remained. Victoria Hayes stayed at her desk, motionless, watching the last few employees disappear down the corridor. She waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely. Then she stood, crossed the room. and locked the door to her section of the floor. The click echoed through the quiet space like the first move in a dangerous game. The glow of her monitor flickered back to life as she sat down again. She pulled her security badge from her pocket, swiped it, and opened the administrative panel, an access level she possessed only because she oversaw internal financial workflows. It wasn't meant for investigations, but tonight it would be. The server tree expanded across her screen. Emails, archives, shared directories, encrypted logs. She began working methodically, drilling into files she'd never bothered to inspect before. Her fingers moved quickly but carefully, opening, scanning, sorting. She checked departmental email backups, then shifted to archived communications between engineering and procurement. She opened budget sheets, then cross-checked them with time-stamped network activity in the server logs. The minutes slipped by, then hours. Outside the office windows, the landscape was swallowed by darkness. Snow flurries brushed against the glass, leaving delicate crystals that melted as quickly as they formed. Inside, Victoria rubbed her temple, fighting the fatigue weighing on her shoulders. But she kept going. She began running keyword searches. First, the obvious ones: bid, tender, housing contract, competitor, sabotage. Then deeper terms: transfer, shell, consultation, meeting off-site, and the names of. The companies Caldwell Industries had clashed with over the past year. Most searches returned routine documents, contracts, internal memos, drafts of project proposals. Then a result appeared that didn't match any naming convention used at Caldwell Industries. A folder tucked deep inside an archive directory labeled simply, Reserve 2024. Victoria frowned. No department used that name. No project matched it, and the last modified timestamp was recent. She clicked it open. Inside there was only one file. No notes, no description, no accompanying documents, just a single video. Her pulse quickened, not in fear but in clarity. Her instincts told her that whatever lay inside this file wasn't meant to be found. She double-clicked. A grainy black and white surveillance recording filled the screen. The video appeared to be taken from a ceiling-mounted camera inside a private booth of an upscale restaurant, one she vaguely recognized from Greenwich Avenue. The view was partially obstructed, but clear enough to make out details. Ethan Caldwell sat on the left side of the booth. Opposite him, a man in a dark overcoat leaned forward, his posture tense and deliberate. The footage had no sound, but the interaction between them was unmistakably covert. Halfway through the clip, the man reached beneath the table and placed something wrapped in dark cloth onto the surface. Ethan hesitated, glanced around nervously, then pulled the object toward him. Victoria's breath slowed. Her eyes didn't blink. She rewound the scene and paused it at the moment the man looked up. The camera caught his profile: sharp jawline, short cropped hair, a scar near his temple. Familiar somehow. She took a screenshot. Then she opened a browser window and began a reverse image search, cross-referencing corporate photos, conference directories, and press releases from industry events. It didn't take long. The match appeared almost immediately. The commercial director of Caldwell Industries' most aggressive competitor. A man publicly accused of poaching talent and illegally acquiring internal bid documents from other companies. Victoria stared at the screen. The timestamp on the surveillance footage glowed at the bottom corner. 2 days before Caldwell Industries lost the major housing contract. Everything inside her went still, because in that moment the entire pattern began to take shape. Ethan's fear, Andrew's involvement, the tension threading through the office. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't incompetence. This was betrayal. Carefully planned, meticulously executed, and catastrophic. And Victoria had just uncovered the first undeniable proof. The morning after uncovering the surveillance footage, Victoria arrived at Caldwell Industries with a mind sharpened by purpose. The tension from the day before still etched the office corridors, but now she understood its source. What she needed next was confirmation, evidence that tied Ethan's covert meeting to the company's financial collapse. She sat at her workstation, opened the internal project directory, and typed the name of the most devastating failure Caldwell Industries had suffered that year: the Montauk Housing Redevelopment Megaproject. It was supposed to be their masterpiece, multi-million-dollar contracts, years of work secured, a showcase of the company's reputation. Losing it hadn't just been embarrassing, it had been catastrophic. She pulled up the original bid submission. The folder contained hundreds of files, blueprints, environmental assessments, feasibility studies, economic forecasts, engineering plans, compliance paperwork. She opened the main PDF, a thick document that had taken dozens of people months to perfect. At first glance, everything looked flawless. She scrolled, page after page, scanning financial tables, cross-checking engineering calculations, comparing line items with archived drafts. She opened the shared history log. Every change had been documented, every edit tracked. She shifted to the Personnel tab. The project lead listed at the top, Andrew Hayes, her hand stilled on the keyboard. It wasn't a surprise, not after the surveillance footage, not after the night he locked her outside, but seeing his name attached to something this consequential struck her with a cold clarity. She opened the bid file again, reviewing it from the first page. The formatting was pristine. The compliance subsections were neatly structured. Diagrams were labeled with careful precision. It was, in every sense, a perfect submission, until page 286. Her scrolling finger hovered in midair. A blank page, nothing typed, no signature, not even a date. Victoria blinked, then zoomed in. The metadata on the page showed it had once contained text, but the text had been deleted, not by accident, deleted manually. She checked the time of the deletion, 1:14 a.m., the night before the bid was due. The last person logged into the file at that time, a Hayes. Her chest tightened, not with heartbreak, but with recognition. This wasn't negligence. It wasn't a rushed oversight. It was a deliberate omission, timed precisely to ensure the submission failed in the final compliance check. A single missing signature page. One blank section among nearly 300 meticulously crafted pages. That mistake had cost Caldwell Industries tens of millions of dollars, months of work, and the trust of their most important public partner. Victoria leaned back in her chair as the pattern clicked into place piece by piece. Ethan's secret meeting, the object wrapped in cloth, the panic spreading through the executive floor, the fear carved into Ethan's face. The night Andrew sabotaged her personally. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't misfortune. This was sabotage, intentional, coordinated, and devastating. She clicked open the HR database next, driven by the need to test a suspicion rising uncomfortably in her mind. She searched for recent resignations in engineering and design. A list populated instantly. Her breath caught. 7 engineers had left the company within the last 3 months. Not junior staff, top-tier specialists, people who had worked at Caldwell Industries for years. She recognized their names from team meetings and project briefings. Bright, capable, deeply respected. She clicked on each profile. Where had they gone? Her stomach dropped. Every single one of them had accepted positions at the same competitor, the competitor whose commercial director had met with Ethan in the surveillance video. She closed her eyes. It all aligned too perfectly to ignore. Andrew had been the project lead. He had access to the final submission. He had altered the file at a critical moment. Key people with knowledge of the project had jumped ship en masse. A competitor stood to gain everything. Victoria reopened the blank page again, staring at the empty white screen. It might have looked insignificant to an outsider, but she understood its weight. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message, one she had been too distracted to see. Now, with every piece falling into place, she realized something chilling. The downfall of Caldwell Industries hadn't been an accident. It had been engineered. And the man at the center of the sabotage was her own husband. Victoria had barely stepped away from her desk when her phone buzzed. An internal extension, one used only by senior leadership. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mrs. Hayes," a composed voice said, "Marianne Caldwell would like to see you in the executive suite." The line went silent. Not Ethan. Not the board. Marianne. The request was unusual enough to raise every instinct Victoria possessed. Marianne Caldwell rarely summoned anyone directly. She was the kind of leader people prepared weeks in advance to meet. Formidable, exacting, and quietly feared throughout Caldwell Industries. Though retired from day-to-day operations, her influence remained woven into every major decision the company made. Victoria straightened her blazer, ignoring the faint tremor in her hands, and made her way to the private elevator reserved for the Caldwell family. The doors opened to an office unlike any other in the building. Rich walnut walls framed architectural drawings of every major Caldwell project, and a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking winter-draped Greenwich. Marianne stood near it, her posture controlled, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hayes," Marianne said without turning around, "come in." Victoria stepped forward quietly. Marianne finally faced her. Her gaze was sharp enough that Victoria felt as though the older woman could see every uncovered truth hidden behind her eyes. "I've reviewed your access logs," Marianne said, "and your findings." Victoria's pulse quickened, but she remained steady. Marianne motioned toward a large table where a thick binder lay open. Inside were printed screenshots of the surveillance video, annotations linking Ethan's behavior to Andrew's timeline, and highlighted excerpts from the sabotaged bid file. Victoria recognized the materials instantly. They were hers, but they had been reorganized, structured, and expanded with precision. "I didn't expect you to find this so quickly," Marianne continued, "but I'm grateful you did." Victoria took a breath. "Mrs. Caldwell, the evidence suggests that Ethan betrayed the company." Marianne cut in. "Yes, that's what Andrew was meant to believe." Victoria paused. Meant to believe? Marianne walked around the table, her heels gliding across the polished floor. Her tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath every word. "My son is many things, Mrs. Hayes. Impulsive, nervous, a poor liar, but he is not a traitor." She clasped her hands behind her back. "The meeting you saw was staged. I instructed Ethan to approach Andrew, to appear vulnerable, frustrated, ready to defect. Andrew took the bait immediately. He believed Ethan could be manipulated. And Ethan, poorly as he handled it, did exactly what I asked." Victoria processed the words carefully. The shock didn't show on her face, but it pulsed through her thoughts. "You set this up." Victoria's voice stayed even. "I set the trap," Marianne replied. "Andrew was arrogant enough to step into it." Marianne tapped the binder. "But the timing worked in our favor. Your investigation traced his sabotage faster than anyone else has in months. You've connected every piece we needed." Victoria felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Not fear, not confusion, but a cold, focused clarity. "Tomorrow night," Marianne continued, "Caldwell Industries will host its annual gala. Every major contractor, investor, and city official will be present. This," she rested a hand on the binder, "will be the presentation that ends Andrew's career and exposes his crimes." Marianne met Victoria's eyes directly. "And you will deliver it." The words hit Victoria with startling force. Her heart beat once, hard, but she didn't look away. "Me?" she asked quietly. "You found the evidence," Marianne said. "You understand its structure. And frankly, You are the person Andrew least expects to stand in front of that screen. Victoria absorbed this. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cold night on the front steps. It all shifted inside her, coalescing into something sharper and colder. Resolve. Her voice came out steady. I'll do it. A faint, approving smile touched Marianne's lips. Good. Then let's finish preparing. And just like that, fear loosened its grip on Victoria. What remained was purpose, clean, crystalline, and merciless. The night before the gala unfolded with a stillness that felt unnatural, as though the world around Victoria Hayes had paused to wait for what would happen next. She lay in her bed, eyes open against the darkness, the ceiling faintly illuminated by moonlight slipping through the curtains. Sleep didn't come, not because of anxiety, but because her mind was too clear, too sharp, too cold. Her body felt strangely weightless. No tremors, no fatigue, no panic. Only a chilling calm settled inside her, a calm that felt almost foreign. She recognized it as the silent steadiness that arrives in the space between revelation and action, a space where emotion no longer had authority. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a bystander. Marianne Caldwell had handed her a role far more powerful than either of those identities. Victoria was now the weapon. On the nightstand beside her, the thin presentation folder lay untouched. She reached for it, resting her palm on its glossy surface. Even closed, it felt heavy, weighted with consequence, with truth, with the kind of evidence that could shatter a man's life in an instant. She lifted it, letting the faint lamplight hit the printed title on the cover. Internal Audit Summary Confidential. It wasn't a summary. It was a verdict. She opened it slowly. Every page she turned felt like a step closer to the moment the room at the Greenwich Country Club would fall silent beneath the weight of her words. Diagrams, screenshots, timestamps, financial leaks, cross-company transfers, all arranged with surgical precision by Marianne. Victoria traced the edge of one page with her thumb, knowing that tomorrow she would stand before hundreds of people, donors, executives, city officials, board members, and lay bare the truth Andrew never intended anyone to see. She closed the folder. Her mind drifted to the venue. She'd been there before, quiet lunches, corporate events, community fundraisers. The ballroom was vast, lined with chandeliers shaped like inverted fountains of light. Marble floors reflected everything above them, creating the illusion of endless space. The air always held a faint hint of orchids and polished silver. Tomorrow it would be transformed for Caldwell Industries Gala. White linens, crystal centerpieces, servers weaving through the crowd with champagne. And at the front of the room, a towering LED screen that would display her presentation. She imagined the orchestral music that would greet the guests, a blend of elegance and understated triumph, the kind meant to reassure investors that the company was strong, steady, unshaken. How ironic. The stakes were higher than anyone in that ballroom would realize until the moment the first slide appeared. Victoria set the folder back onto the nightstand, then rose from the bed. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Snow dusted the edges of the backyard, shimmering faintly under the outdoor lights. Somewhere across the property line, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Her breath fogged the glass. She wasn't afraid of Andrew anymore. The image of him shutting the door in her face no longer stung. It only clarified who he was, and who she had become since that moment. What waited tomorrow wasn't revenge. It was exposure, and Victoria Hayes had never felt more ready. The next evening, the Greenwich Country Club glowed like a beacon against the winter dark. Dozens of cars lined the circular drive, headlights sweeping across the stone facade as guests stepped out in gowns and tailored suits. Laughter drifted into the night, mingling with the sharp scent of cold air and evergreens. Victoria Hayes arrived beside Marianne Caldwell. Stepping out of the back seat of the black sedan that had picked them up from the office, Marianne walked ahead with her usual controlled grace. Every inch the iron matriarch who commanded respect without ever raising her voice. Victoria followed half a step behind, exactly where Marianne wanted her. From this position, Victoria was both present and invisible, overlooked, unnoticed, protected by Marianne's shadow while remaining strategically placed in the room where everything would unfold. It was a strange kind of invisibility, one she had never experienced before, but tonight it was an advantage. Inside the lobby, chandeliers cast warm light across the marble floors. The atmosphere was lavish, polished, celebratory. Guests greeted one another with practiced smiles, raising champagne flutes as orchestral strings played softly from the stage in the distance. No one suspected a thing. Caldwell Industries had suffered one of its most humiliating losses in years, yet the gala buzzed with optimism. Investors praised the company's durability. Contractors assured one another that setbacks were temporary. Employees joked about the cold weather, the endless highway traffic, the difficulty of finding parking. The irony hung thick in the air. Victoria stayed close behind Marianne as they entered the main hall. Servers glided across the room with trays of canapes. A towering ice sculpture depicting the company logo shimmered at the center of the ballroom. The LED screen behind the stage displayed footage of completed projects, bridges, waterfront developments, high-rise renovations, everything Caldwell Industries prided itself on. Marianne scanned the room, her expression composed but unreadable. "Stay with me," she murmured quietly to Victoria, not breaking stride. "No one needs to know your role until it's time." Victoria nodded. She felt the weight of the thin presentation folder inside her clutch, its edges pressing lightly against her palm. She hadn't opened it since last night. She didn't need to. Every slide, every timestamp burned in her memory. They moved through the crowd, stopping only briefly as board members greeted Marianne with overly warm smiles. Men twice her size shifted uncomfortably beneath her gaze. Women in elegant dresses leaned in with forced enthusiasm. Everyone knew Marianne Caldwell was the power behind the company, even when she stood silent. Victoria remained half a step behind, watching everything while drawing no attention. It was remarkable how easily people ignored someone who did not demand space. Across the room, she spotted Ethan Caldwell near the bar. His posture was rigid, shoulders too tight beneath his suit jacket. His hand gripped a glass of sparkling water, though he hadn't taken a sip. A smile flickered across his face when guests approached, but it vanished the moment they turned away. He wasn't celebrating. He was stalling. When he finally glanced in Marianne's direction, his expression faltered. He dropped his gaze almost instantly and pretended to study the garnish inside his glass. The tension carved across his features was unmistakable. Victoria read it clearly now. He knew the trap was about to close. A group of city officials laughed loudly nearby, clinking glasses as they boasted about upcoming contracts and holiday trips. None of them realized the storm gathering silently at the edge of the ballroom. Victoria stood still in the middle of the glittering chaos, the music swelling around her. She felt no fear, only the chilling calm that had carried her through the night before. The gala was in full motion now. The crowd was settled. The stage was set. All that remained was the moment the storm would break. The lights in the ballroom dimmed in a slow, controlled fade, like someone turning down the heartbeat of the room. Conversation tapered off into whispers, then into a low murmur, then into nothing at all. The orchestra shifted to a softer, lingering note before quieting completely. At the front of the hall, the massive LED screen glowed to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice carrying smoothly over the sound system. "Thank you for joining us tonight. Before we continue, Caldwell Industries would like to share an internal presentation about our next steps and our future direction." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "Please welcome Victoria Hayes." For a moment, Victoria remained perfectly still at the edge of the crowd. Then she stepped forward. Her heels touched the marble steps leading up to the platform with a calm, measured rhythm. The room watched with polite curiosity, some recognizing her only as Andrew Hayes's wife, others as a mid-level executive they had seen in passing. No one was prepared for what she was about to show them. Marianne stood near the front table, her expression unreadable, eyes tracking Victoria's every move. Victoria reached the podium, set down her notes, almost unnecessary now, and lifted her gaze to the sea of faces, lit only by the glow of the screen. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady, amplified but not loud. "Thank you for being here." She pressed the first button on the remote in her hand. The opening slide appeared, a clean Caldwell Industries logo, followed by a title. Internal Audit, Unauthorized Financial Diversions and Tender Irregularities. A ripple went through the room. Not applause, not outrage, just a subtle tightening of posture, a collective straightening of backs, as people realized this wasn't a routine update. Victoria continued. "For the past several months," she said, "Caldwell Industries has been conducting a quiet, thorough internal review of recent financial losses and tender failures. Tonight you will see why." She clicked again. The screen filled with diagrams, arrows connecting accounts, lines tracing pathways from Caldwell Industries' primary operating funds into obscure, low-activity entities. Each line was labeled with dates, transaction IDs, and amounts that climbed steadily into the millions. "These," Victoria said, "are unauthorized transfers made from Caldwell Industries accounts to a network of shell companies. On paper, they appear legitimate, a series of consulting fees, contractor payments, and vendor retainers. In reality, they have no operational substance. They exist for one purpose: to siphon money out of this company." She zoomed in on one node. "This entity," she continued, highlighting a company name no one in the room recognized, "was registered 18 months ago. No staff, no physical office, no website. Yet, it has received a significant portion of those unauthorized transfers." A few people shifted in their seats. Some exchanged glances. Others stared straight ahead, frozen. She clicked again. The diagram collapsed into a single line that extended from Caldwell Industries to the shell company, and then to a familiar logo. The competitor. A hush swept through the room, heavier than the quiet that came before. "The funds did not simply disappear," Victoria said. "They were redirected." She moved to the next slide. A grainy image filled the screen, a private restaurant booth captured from above. Ethan sat on one side. Across from him, a man in a dark coat leaned forward. The quality wasn't perfect, but the identity of the second man was clear enough. "This is surveillance footage from a restaurant in town," Victoria said. "You may recognize the man on the right as the commercial director of our primary competitor." A murmur grew and then died again. The footage played for a few seconds, no sound, only the image of something wrapped in dark cloth being placed on the table. Ethan hesitated, then took it. Victoria let the clip end in silence. Then she clicked to the next slide. A high-resolution photograph appeared. Andrew Hayes smiling at the camera, his arm around Sabrina Flores. Sabrina stood slightly angled, one hand resting on her clearly pregnant stomach, a stack of ultrasound images in her other hand. The shot had been taken outside a private medical clinic. Several guests gasped. Someone at the back of the room whispered something sharp and incredulous. Faces turned toward Andrew's table. He went rigid, color draining from his face. "The financial diversion was not random," Victoria said quietly. "It benefited specific individuals." She advanced to the next slide. Incorporation documents filled the screen. Official registrations, signature blocks, ownership percentages. The shell company at the center of the earlier diagram now bore two names in plain, undeniable text. One belonged to the competitor's commercial director. The other belonged to Andrew Hayes. "There it is!" Someone breathed from the center of the room. "Oh my God!" Victoria didn't flinch. She clicked one last time. The final slide appeared, a PDF scan of the Montauk Housing Project bid. The mega-contract Caldwell Industries was expected to win. Her cursor moved smoothly across the document as she spoke. "This," she said, "is the submission Caldwell Industries sent in for the Montauk redevelopment tender. Hundreds of pages of engineering, environmental, and financial documentation. Everything perfect." She scrolled quickly, page numbers ticking by. Until here. She stopped on a nearly blank page. No signature, no date, no company seal. "This missing final authorization page," Victoria said, "was the formal reason our bid was rejected. The error was not accidental. It was manually deleted hours before submission by the project lead, Andrew Hayes." The ballroom fell utterly silent. No one moved. No one coughed. No glasses clinked. The only sound was the faint, steady hum of the lighting system overhead. At his table, Andrew sat frozen, his face contorting, first in disbelief, then in rage, then in raw, unfiltered terror. His eyes darted from the screen to Victoria, then to the exits. He bolted to his feet. For a second, it seemed he might shout, deny everything, try to force his way back into control. But instead, he turned sharply and tried to push through the aisle, heading for the side door. Two men in dark suits, guests on paper, officers in reality, stepped into his path. "Mr. Hayes," one of them said quietly, firmly, "you need to come with us." Andrew stopped, chest heaving, eyes wide. The room watched in stunned silence as the officers took their positions beside him and began to lead him away from the stage, from the company, and from the life he thought he had secured. The conspiracy had been exposed. There was no going back. The ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence as the officers stepped to either side of Andrew Hayes. His wrists were pulled behind his back, the metallic click of the handcuffs echoing louder than any of the music that had played earlier. Conversations had stopped entirely. No one dared whisper. No one breathed too loudly. Andrew looked nothing like the confident executive who had strutted through Caldwell Industries for years. His shoulders sagged. His complexion had gone ashen, and his jaw trembled with a mixture of disbelief and raw panic. He tried to regain composure, but the weight of the evidence, every slide, every timestamp, every dollar trail, pressed on him like a collapsing wall. As the officers guided him toward the exit, he turned his head sharply, seeking something or someone to anchor himself to. His gaze landed on Victoria at the podium. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, time held still between them. Andrew's stare was not angry nor apologetic. It was pure fear, and beneath that fear, utter confusion. As though he couldn't comprehend how the woman he once locked outside in the freezing night now stood in the center of a ballroom, dismantling the life he had tried. So hard to hide behind lies. Victoria didn't look away. Her expression was steady, unreadable. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only the cold clarity that had grown in her since the night the door slammed in her face. The officers led Andrew through the side hall, their footsteps fading as they exited the ballroom. Only when the door shut behind him did sound begin to return. A few guests exhaled shakily. Others shifted in their seats, trying to regain a sense of normality that no longer existed. Then Ethan Caldwell stepped forward. He approached the stage slowly, hands clasped behind his back, posture stiff. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but it wasn't the exhaustion of someone blindsided. It was the exhaustion of someone whose fear had finally caught up with him. He stopped a few feet from the podium, facing the audience. "I have something to say," Ethan announced, his voice shaking just enough to betray his nerves. The room quieted again. Ethan swallowed. The meeting shown in the surveillance footage, the one with the competitor's director, it was orchestrated. He paused. By my mother. Gasps scattered through the crowd. But, he continued, the truth is my actions created vulnerabilities. Months ago, I concealed information about internal audits. I avoided reporting discrepancies. I let the situation deteriorate deeper than it ever should have. I enabled Andrew Hayes by refusing to confront what I should have confronted. He inhaled sharply. For that, I take full responsibility. And effective immediately. He looked toward the front table, where Marianne watched him with an expression carved from stone. I resign as CEO of Caldwell Industries. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Shock, confusion, disbelief. Ethan's shoulders slumped as though the words had drained the last of his strength. He turned fully to his mother, waiting, hoping, for some flicker of sympathy. Marianne Caldwell gave him none. She rose slowly from her seat. Your resignation is accepted, she said, her voice crisp, cool, final. We will discuss transitional matters privately. Ethan nodded once, chin trembling, then stepped down from the stage, moving past the tables with a defeated heaviness. No one approached him. No one spoke. He passed through the same doors Andrew had been taken through minutes earlier, disappearing from the room with far more dignity, but no less devastation. Back at the podium, Victoria remained still, the lights reflecting off her calm expression. Marianne returned to her place at the table, her gaze never leaving Victoria. A symbolic shift had taken place, quiet, unspoken, but unmistakable. One era had ended. Another was ready to begin. The ballroom felt different now. Quieter, heavier, as though the air itself had absorbed the shock of Andrew's arrest and Ethan's resignation. Guests remained seated, hushed and uncertain, their attention fixed on the stage where the company had just witnessed the collapse of its own leadership. Victoria Hayes still stood behind the podium, her hands resting lightly on its surface. Her breathing was steady, her gaze forward. She hadn't moved since Ethan walked out, and no one dared speak until the next step became clear. Then Marianne Caldwell